Hello everyone, this is another episode of Timeless Dialogues, and today we're going to be dealing with a totally different topic than what most of you are used to listening to on this podcast. Namely, we're going to ask the question, what's the best martial art for you? Now, here's one of the things that I think people need to realize is that I live in just two totally different worlds. I work in the world of academia and travel and speak and teach at the graduate level and at the PhD level with philosophy and ethics and politics and all of these different things. But I also live in the world of martial arts. I currently teach karate. I've trained in wrestling for a number of years growing up as a little kid in Iowa, and I currently do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I'm a 4-stripe purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Hopefully I'll continue to progress with that. But one of the things that I find is that people keep asking me this question, which martial art should I train? Which one's best for me? How should I go about it? And well, frankly, I'm making this video so that I can answer those types of questions for people. Because what I want to do is I want you to see something that's related to this. This is not only just a passion of mine, I actually think it fits under the broad heading of timeless dialogues. Because so many issues as it relates to philosophy and theory and ethics relate to things like, should I be able to defend myself? Should I be able to defend my family? Can I actually defend myself? Like, what's the best martial art? What's the most efficient martial art? And all those types of broad questions. Now, I would love to dive into each of those questions. And at some point in time, I actually plan to, because I'm going to kind of do a little bit of a series on martial arts. But for today, I want to look at this question of what's the best martial art for you? Now, one thing that I want you to realize is this, is that there's probably going to be a variety of different people who actually click on a video like this. You're going to have those people who have no martial arts background, and they're listening to this because they want to get into martial arts. And this is a video that's primarily for you, somebody who's trying to figure out what's the difference between karate and judo and tang sudo. And we're going to talk about those to some degree, but we're going to talk about them in a different way than you're probably used to. The other type of person is the experienced martial artist, whether, the training MMA fighter or the black belt in some martial art. And you're really just listening to this to see whether or not I'm full of crap and actually know what I'm talking about. Well, frankly, some of that can be rather subjective because other people have insights that I won't have. This is an introductory video, but there's going to be something in here for you. Namely, I want you to see this is a question that people ask, and two, maybe some of the answers that we're going to give and some of the topics that we're briefly going to discuss will give you the tools to answer these types of questions if somebody's coming into your school or you're talking with a family member or a friend and so forth. So here are some of the questions that people intuitively start to ask when they're looking at the questions of martial arts. Will this martial art actually help me defend myself? Or will this martial art help me get into shape? Or can I physically do this martial art? Like, am I actually able to throw the guy? Or can I actually kick the person? And so on and so forth. However, one thing that I want you to see, bear with me, look at me real quick. I want you to know this. No Aikido practitioners, not a single one, was injured in the making of this video. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's dive into this a little bit. So the question of, will this martial art work for me? And here's why I think a lot of people get into martial arts, is that they deeply want to be able to protect themselves, and they see that as a basic right to be able to defend themselves. Or they get into it because they feel like they need to be able to defend a wife or their children or somebody else that's within their sphere and circle who may need to be defended. And part of this is that we realize we live in a world in which there are bad people who will do terrible things to you, and you need to be able to defend yourself. Now, does that mean you got to be the D1 wrestler or the Olympic judoka or the MMA fighter? Probably not, because what I've found in my experience is that the average person, frankly, has no clue how to fight. So as the old thing that like Bruce Lee that you've heard of used to say, a person with a year or two of wrestling and 6 months to a year of boxing, you're going to be able to take like 99% of the people that are out there. Just think about that. It doesn't take a whole lot to actually learn how to defend yourself. So things that people are going to look at is this, is that, will it work for me? Will the techniques work? And here's one way that I try to look at it, is that many of the traditional martial arts, specifically the good grappling arts like judo or wrestling, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, sambo and its grappling aspects to it, or even many of the traditional striking martial arts like traditional karate, forms of traditional taekwondo, Muay Thai, boxing, each of them, because they have a strong martial element to it, if trained right, will obviously be able to help you defend yourself. Because what you have to see is that many of these martial arts were developed really for that purpose. The martial war aspect of them were brought to the table so that you actually know how to defend yourself. But what we find is that the issue is not necessarily which martial art am I training. Now, it does matter to some degree, and we'll get to that. Rather, it's how are you actually training that martial art? And this is what I don't think a lot of people realize, is that it comes down to, are you dealing with live, active sparring or martial theory and passive drilling? And here's what I want you to realize is this, is that if you're in a martial art, whether it's any of the ones that have worked, like say judo or jujitsu or karate or boxing, and all we do is we just sit around and we talk martial theory. In this situation, I might do this and you might do that. And you're going to grab the guy's hand and you're going to turn it back and they're going to fall to the ground. That stuff doesn't actually translate into real life martial practice. So any martial art can either, in one sense, work or not work. The key comes down to how you're actually practicing that martial art. And that's where the divide, I think, needs to come down to, is that if you're looking for a martial art that you can use that's going to defend yourself, that's going to actually work in a real life situation, that you're going to be able to do in a time of dire need, you need to find one that doesn't just talk about martial theory or talk about hypothetical situations. Frankly, the way that you learn how to become a better martial artist is you got to get beat down. You got to get humbled to some degree. You got to embrace the fact that you're not going to be able to get out of these moves, that you're going to have to listen to an instructor on how to deal with these situations. And through that process, you're going to learn how to defend yourself. Now, related to this, I can hear all these other people making this claim. Does that mean that I have to fight in every situation in order to learn how to fight? And I would say not necessarily. In the beginning, and I think this is something that Rickson Gracie is very good at talking about, is that when you're training martial arts in the very beginning, you don't necessarily have to see your training partner as an opponent. Rather, you should see them as a training partner. You can learn through a variety of passive drills a lot of things to do. But here's the kicker. It can't just stop there. At some point in time, you're going to actually have to spar, because sparring is where you're going to learn where you're weak, where you're strong. You're going to learn what it's like to go against guys that are bigger than you, stronger than you, faster than you. Or if you're a big, strong guy, you're going to learn what it's like to go with somebody that's smaller, maybe quicker than you, that's more wiry, and all those different kinds of things. But the point that I want you to see is that passive drilling alone makes for an ineffective, inefficient martial art. You have to go from talking about martial theory to actual martial practice. So then some of the things that we're going to look at is this, is that people then start asking me questions like, so what about all those katas or those pumses or all those forms? What are those things all about? Now, I will readily admit this is a divide within the martial arts world. There are a lot of people who are going to tell you, these are these sequences from these different people that are going to be attacking you. And in that, you're learning how to fight maybe multiple opponents. Or you're going to hear people say, no, these are going to be things where you're going to learn how to develop body movement and mechanics. Other people are going to say, well, these are merely just expressions of the art side of whatever that particular martial art may be. So here's how I typically answer this question. I just start out flat out saying this: katas or pumses or forms can be ways in which you can learn body movement. Nobody's going to deny that. They can also be ways of keeping your body in shape. You know, there's sometimes this idea that we learn these and we practice them in secrecy and it's a way of keeping you in shape. Maybe for some it is, maybe for some it isn't. That's sometimes hard to tell. Another thing that I try to tell people is that the repetition of movements in sequential ways is really what some aspects of a kata or a form or a pumse, whatever we're going to call them, would be. And to some degree, each martial art has that. In fact, one of my martial arts instructors used to say, you know, when a guy gets up and he goes through like his shadow boxing routines, well, that could very well be equivalent to some degree to a kata or whichever it is. But here's the key thing. Listen to me here. This is the key point. Katas alone, just like shadow boxing alone, are not actually going to translate into real life martial practice. They may give you movement, they may give you visualization, they may give you all those kinds of things, but the only way to learn how to actually deal with a real person in a real situation is you got to start out with passive drilling that's going to then grenade up into more resistant drilling. So there's obviously this reality that whenever you're learning something, whether it's in basketball, football, or martial arts, you initially just have to learn what's going on. You have to learn the actual technique or the move that's being done. And then you have to deal with it in a variety of graded in difficulty situations. So let's use basketball as an example. Day one, you're trying to dribble the ball. You have no clue how to dribble the ball. And then you start to figure that out. And then, you know, typically a brother or a neighbor or a friend there, and you're trying to play and you're going back and forth and they steal the ball from you or the ball flies off. But through this gradation, you get better. And eventually you're able to run up and down the court. You're able to interact with different opponents. You're able to dribble in between your legs and score the basket. Well, in a similar way, martial arts can work like that. It's that we learn the techniques, and then we got to go through this whole gradation of higher resistant training. And eventually we're sparring. We're playing the game as is. And, you know, a lot of people, when they train martial arts, the problem is that they either deal with just learning the techniques without even passive drilling to some degree, or they spend all of their time talking about passive drilling and some kind of martial theory. And usually these come down to people who are interacting and they like to talk about the different things, but, well, frankly, they suck. Just to be absolutely honest, they're not able to put into practice 99% of their martial theory. They're going to give you all these, well, this doesn't work on this person or that person, or, you know, in this situation. When the reality is that in order to become a good martial artist, you kind of have to develop the martial callus, is the way that I put it. And how do you get that? Harder repetition over time with real resistant opponents in real life situations. Now, listen to me. Here's what was so key to so many of these different martial arts. There's one figure named Jigoro Kano, who was the founder of judo. And one of the key things that he was bringing into this, now he came out of a very traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu that didn't always have live sparring. But what do you find with judo? You find rindori. You find really resistant people actually doing the techniques through a gradation of resistance into actual sparring. And that's why when you look at a good judoka, they're absolute killers. They're not just talking about martial theory. You're actually able to watch them throw the person, trip the person, do the lock on the person. In addition to this, this is exactly what we find in wrestling or in sambo. But where I've seen it the most is actually within like Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And I say this because that's what I have the most experience with. I've seen it in wrestling because I grew up wrestling, but I've also seen it in jiu-jitsu. I've never practiced official judo or sambo. Frankly, we just don't have a lot of those where I'm at. Like, I've learned a lot of judo throws, but I've never technically been ranked in judo. But here's the whole key. What you're finding in these martial arts is that people aren't just talking about theory. In order to progress, you're actually having to spar. And the good of that is that it kind of just takes the fudge factor out of it. Because there's a lot of people out there that, oh, I'm a black belt in this, but you know that they're not actually able to do what they're talking about. And that's why I say, like, there's no fake black belts in judo. There's no fake black belts in jujitsu. Yeah, you're going to find one on the internet, but they get rooted out very quickly. Why? Because they suck and they can't actually do what they say that they can do. Whereas when you flip it around with some of these ones that are martial theory and kata and all the rest, you've got some people that are really good at katas, terrible at sparring. So just think about that in a real life situation. I can go out and I can do the beginning move of this or that, and I can show you passive drilling on how to grab the wrist and flip the person. But when push comes to shove, they can't actually do that to the real person. It never really translates into real active sparring. So when it comes down to this, if you're looking for a martial art that can actually help you to defend yourself, you need to find one that has active sparring, real sparring. That's why one figure, his name's John Danaher. I get this from Danaher, this next point, where he talks about, well, what's the best martial art? Which one should I do? It's the one that has real active sparring and combative sparring or sport-like sparring. And I'm going to kind of make those all synonymous to some degree. And the reason for it is that they're preparing you for the reality and the chaos of combat. You know, fighting doesn't happen where, you know, two guys are going to square off. Okay, we bow, we're good, we're here, we're there. Usually, real life combat is chaotic. People are being thrown around. There are different conditions that you're not expecting. But what's going to mirror that the most is going to be real sportive combating. And you say, well, I don't think it's the same. Okay, go down and wrestle a good high school wrestler. See what that's going to work like. Well, I don't think it's going to be the same. Go fight a jujitsu black belt and tell me if that's not going to mirror something of the difficulty of a situation. Or you're going to say things like, well, I don't like the idea of competition because the rules aren't like the street. Well, here's the thing. The street has, to some degree, some elements of rules. To some degree. People don't realize this. Like, there are a lot of fights that you see on the internet where there are just certain boundaries that people don't pass. I mean, let's just say, well, there are no rules. Okay, sometimes there are chaotic situations that seem like there are no rules. But what you have to see is this, is that in real live active sparring, we are getting as close as possible to no rule situations. Oh, you can't eye gouge, or you can't kick them in the groin, or you can't do this, or you can't fish hook, you can't do that. Well, why are we not doing that in sporting situations? Because they can really hurt. But also it takes very little technique or skill to kick a guy in the groin. I'm going to palm strike him in the nose. I'm going to fish hook the guy. These are really untrained techniques. So what you need to find is you don't need to find a martial art that works on people that don't know anything about martial arts. You need to find a martial art that actually works against trained martial artists, because there you're going to find out the techniques that actually work versus the hypothetical martial theory that typically never works. So as we're going to keep looking at this, what I want you to see is that I think combat sports actually prepare you the best for this. In particular, what I have to see here is that this can be done whether it's in jiu-jitsu or boxing or Muay Thai, but also many of the traditional martial arts. These things can happen as long as they're getting close to or actually full contact sparring martial arts. You know, we used to do this sparring, you'd go, you'd stop like a quarter inch away, point, and it's done. Well, that's really nice, and it may look really cool, and you know, you may be able to win a tournament from it, but that's not real sparring. Like, part of real fighting is I've been hit, I gotta now deal with the reality of being hit, or this guy's smashing me and I can't get him out, and I'm getting claustrophobic and I'm losing my breath, and I'm giving up an arm, and now the guy's starting to attack my arm and I can't get out of it. So what we have to find is that traditional martial arts can and do work if they're trained the right way. So coming down to this, you want a martial art that works for you. You want one that's trained in the right way. Now I want to deal with this other question that's going to help with this. Which one should I pick? Striking or grappling? So here's the reality that we saw is that sort of pre the 90s, the martial arts that were most dominant through the movies or what you saw in your local martial arts school was the traditional striking martial art. We're going to cue up, we're going to have the fancy kick, we're going to have the quick punch. And then everything changed in the 90s with UFC. And it all changed with the Gracie family going in and showing that actually many of those traditional striking arts, while they can have value to them, they're not able to deal with all situations, namely grappling. And what you're going to find is that in a variety of circumstances, in real combat, the overwhelming majority of people who win those are grapplers. Here's why. One, it's very, very difficult to actually strike somebody and knock them out. Like, how many times do you see professional boxers hit a person and you're like, well, it's a professional boxer. It doesn't matter. You're being hit by a professional boxer. They're hitting this person and they just don't go down or they don't get, knocked out to some degree. So in addition to this, it's not only just that striking isn't always as effective and as efficient as we think that it is, but here's another reality. The vast majority of fights go to the ground. Look it up on the internet. People slip, they fall, a person gets taken to the ground, and you've got to be able to deal with that. Which also brings us to the reality is that if you are a smaller, weaker person, and you got somebody that's bigger than stronger than you, and that thing goes to the ground, and all you've done is, YMCA, karate, or taekwondo, you're toast. You're not going to be able to deal with this. You're not going to be able to just bench press the guy off or roll over. And that's what the beauty of what happened with jiu-jitsu. So now my point is this, is that in many respects, grappling is extraordinarily superior to striking. Now, the flip side of it is that you also need to be able to throw some hands. You need to be able to hit and learn what it's like to take a hit. You're there and you're looking at a guy and he starts squaring back at you. Hey, guess what he's getting ready to do? Even the untrained guy, I'm here, I'm coming in. They're getting ready to throw that. So what you need to do is you need to learn, I got my hands, he's coming in, I got to bow, I got to move, I got to dodge, I got to hit, all these different things of blocking. And here's one of the realities is that if you have just good defense, because you've seen strikes coming at you, you're going to be able to deal with the vast majority of people who telegraph their strikes and you see them coming from a mile away. They're here and this thing's coming all the way out here and it's super slow and then it clocks you versus, a good boxer where it's going to snap, so on and so forth. So what I want you to see is that you need to be able to train both. You need to know both. But most circumstances, a clinch occurs, it goes to the ground, and you need to be able to deal with the ground fighting, but you also need to be able to have a good striking game. So the question I'm really answering is, which one should I train? I think given the context in which we're in, the best martial art to start out with is some kind of grappling martial art. It's going to give you the most realistic training method and the most realistic situations that are going to give you combative sport elements. You can sign your kid up for the wrestling team and they can actually go out and wrestle and deal with the reality of that situation, or the local jiu-jitsu or judo or sambo or whichever. And then after that, you can start to go in and develop striking martial arts because, again, 7-year-olds aren't typically knocking each other out with a right cross. Rather, they're clinching, they're going to the ground and so forth. And that's what you need to initially learn. But that also translates to most adults. You need to learn grappling and the clinch and the reality of that kind of circumstance related to it. Now, here's another one. People are going to ask this question. Well, what about combat? Do I need to do any tournaments? And to learn how to fight, no, you don't have to do a tournament, period. Like, there are people who have been in fights, who've never trained martial arts, never done a tournament in their life. But here's what tournaments are going to do. They're going to give you, to a different degree, this anxiety or angst or what it's actually like to be in some kind of combative situation. You're going to have to think, I actually have this person in front of me. I slap hands, I bump fists. They're coming at me and I need to be ready for it. Now, related to this, I want to make a little footnote that the goal of an experienced martial artist is to realize, like, in a combative tournament situation, we can get a little nervous, but we want to try to make our training very similar to our sparring in a tournament in that regard, because the only difference is usually a ref and maybe more people. Like the better you are, the less anxiety you have with that, which is another reason is that the better you are and the more you've competed, the less anxious you're going to be if you actually get into a real street altercation. So with this, all I want to say is that, you know, the big things that I want you to take away is, so which martial art is best for you? Well, it's the one that's going to be able to defend you the best. And those are going to primarily come from grappling martial arts and good striking martial arts. So if you're going to pick them in the order, I would say something like this. Start out with jiu-jitsu. I think jiu-jitsu is the most efficient, effective martial art on the face of the planet. Start there. In that, learn good judo takedowns for the gi, or if somebody's wearing a coat. Also, train no gi. Learn what it's like to have to interact with somebody that's sweaty or moving and those different kinds of things. Learn some good wrestling in order to take a person down. You know, we don't need to just be butt scooting jiu-jitsu fighters. You actually need to learn how to take a person down. Then, when it comes to striking, learn boxing and Muay Thai first. They're the most effective and efficient striking martial arts that we have. You know, related to this, if say you don't have jiu-jitsu or you don't have this, but you have some crazy judo or sambo, sign up for them. They're going to be excellent, especially sambo. Sambo is basically like combative judo jiu-jitsu with striking added all to it. It's an incredibly effective martial art. Now, I'm not dogging on any of the other martial arts. If you're going to do something like karate or taekwondo or something like that, those are fine. And if you want to train katas, I don't have a problem with that either, but don't stop there. You have to take those traditional martial arts and apply them with real active drilling and real active sparring. If those things are brought into the equation, you better believe that there are some good martial arts within those realms. That you have some strikers within certain versions of those martial arts that can keep up very well with the other striking martial arts. But if it's just forms and passive drilling, it's not worth your time. It's not going to actually equip you to do what you need to do. So let's finish with this. What about those who are, you know, just looking to train? Well, sometimes it's this. Other things to consider is, how close is it to my house? Do I enjoy the people that are there? How much money is it going to cost me? And if you're getting ripped off and you don't enjoy the people, don't train there. So in conclusion with this, which martial art should you train? You should train one that has active drilling, active sparring, that doesn't just talk about martial theory, doesn't just sit in the realm of ideas, but actually engages with real combative elements. Also, you should find one that's going to be in a community that you enjoy, studying something that's going to be applicable, that's not frankly ripping you off financially. So again, thank you, appreciate it, like and subscribe.
Oh, it was a fraternity prank. Also, the Pope decided today to release Vatican-related bath products. An incredible thing. Yes, it's a new Pope on a rope. It's right, Pope on a rope. Wash with it, go straight to heaven. Thank you.
Party on, Garth.